I do not like the idea that some people die and suffer needlessly. I don't like the idea that some parents have to take turns staying up every night so that their child will wake up the next day. And so I built this, a convulsive seizure detection and notification system. This device detects convulsive seizures, and when it does, it sends a text message to family, to friends, and to emergency personnel to get them assistance as soon as possible. For seizure patients, it gets them help when they need it most. So now let me tell you about how this all started. In 2010, I was running to catch my train, and I managed to hop on board right before its departure time. And of course, I get on the train, and I hear over the loudspeakers that the train's going to be delayed. And naturally, I'm a bit peeved as I just sprinted to catch this train. I had my heavy book bag and my gym bag, but my attitude quickly changed when I heard the reason for the delay, a medical emergency. Apparently, a woman in the car ahead of mine had a seizure. Fortunately, due to some quick medical attention, she was all right, and my train departed sometime after. Now, like most nights, I had a lot of homework to do, so naturally, I started to procrastinate. And I began to wonder, instead of work, what would have happened if she were not on a train in Boston, surrounded by medical professionals? What if instead she was at home? What if she was at home with her toddlers? What if she were on a run? What if she were in the shower? Frankly, the answers to these questions frightened me. And so I thought there has to be something out there to help these people. Now, seizures at the time weren't foreign to me. My dog with epilepsy I'd witnessed have numerous seizures. Furthermore, a close family friend of mine had a diabetic seizure years ago and broke his back as a result. So I had a cursory understanding of both their frequency and of their danger, but there are several things that I didn't know. 50 million people worldwide live with epilepsy, a chronic seizure disorder. 30% of these individuals will continue to have chronic seizures despite medical treatment. And 5% of the world's population will experience at least one seizure in their lifetime. So with these statistics, you'd think, there has to be something out there to help these people. There has to be something that is capable of detecting seizures. And there is. There's dogs, man's best friend. Some dogs have an uncanny ability of being able to detect the onset of seizure. There's people around, much like those people who helped the woman on my train. And there's devices like cessation of breathing devices, heart rate monitors, bedside monitors, et cetera, et cetera. I'm probably not doing this list justice, but the question for me wasn't just what devices exist to detect seizures, but what devices exist to detect and notify someone that a seizure has occurred all of the time, 24/7. So for seizure notification, what's out there? Well, nothing. And so I decided to do something about that. I set out to create a device that would be capable of detecting convulsive seizures, and I did a lot of research in the process. And I read a lot of papers, and one of the papers I read suggested using electrodermal activity to determine the status of a seizure patient. Others suggested other physiological methods like blood pressure and heart rate, et cetera, et cetera. But how do we know that someone's having a seizure? If I'm standing here and someone right here is having a seizure, how do we know they're having a seizure? I guess I could run over to them with a multimeter and check their skin conductance, or I could check their heart rates, their pulse, what have you. But we know that they're having a seizure because they're on the floor convulsing. Their movement is atypical. Their behavior is not normal. And so I decided that's exactly how I would detect seizures. And so I created this algorithm that differentiates between typical motion and the motion present when you have a seizure. Now, it looks really complicated, and it was kind of intentional, to be honest, but it's actually really simple, and it boils down to these two main ideas, and that's that seizure acceleration is of high amplitude, and seizure acceleration is of contrast amplitude. So what does that mean? Well, right now when I'm standing in front of you, I'm waving my arms a little bit. Now, if you were to graph the acceleration of my arms over time, you'd see these little blips here and there. There'd be these low amplitude spikes, and they'd be in a generally non-repetitive pattern. However, when you experience convulsions or some shaking or some sort of seizure-like motion, you create these high-amplitude, contrasting acceleration spikes where you'll accelerate forwards very quickly, followed by a prompt deacceleration and acceleration in the opposite direction. And it creates this pattern over here. And so that's basically the idea that that algorithm is based around. Now, this seemed like a good idea to me. It seemed like, this would work. But I needed some way of validating this algorithm and this data. And so I had to come up with some way to do this. And unfortunately, at the time of the creation of this device, I was just a junior in high school, so I didn't have access to medical facilities. And I didn't have access to seizure acceleration data because that data is virtually unheard of. And so I had to come up with some way to get this data. And I couldn't simply go up to a seizure patient and go, hey, can you stick this device yourself and stop taking your medication? I need some data. But I did have a solution. As I mentioned, my dog has epilepsy. So I figured what I'd do, I'd take this device, stick it to the pooch, and cut him off his medications for a couple of weeks and see what happened. Fortunately for him, unfortunately for me, my parents weren't too thrilled with that idea. So I had to come up with a new solution. And I did come up with an alternative solution. And what that was I wrote a program. And this program tracks a point through a series of images and then calculates the acceleration of that point. Now, how is that helpful? Well, what I did and decided to do is I found these videos of patients having seizures online. And I took those videos, split them up into hundreds of frames, and then manually placed a point on every single frame over the limb of the patient. I then took those images and ran them through this program, and out came the acceleration of a patient having a seizure. And these are the results I got. And as you can see, the data closely mimics what I said seizure data would look like, where there's these high amplitude spikes that are contrasting in nature. Those horizontal lines you see are the thresholds, how high of an amplitude seizure acceleration has to be considered seizure acceleration. So with that knowledge, I built something, and this is what I built, the seizure detection and notification tool. Now, this prototype dates back to 2011, and since then, we've made a lot of progress. I'm fortunate enough to have patent pending on this device and the algorithm, and late last summer, I licensed the technology to Stroh Medical Technologies, where we've continued to develop this idea. We're currently looking at integrating additional components and sensors, such as EMG sensors and electrodermal activity sensors, to increase the capability of the device. We're hoping by late this summer to have a clinically ready data logging device. So what does this device do? Well, it detects convulsive seizures. It sends a text message when it's detected a seizure, and it sends that text message with the location included, so they can get help as soon as possible. It's entirely wearable. It's not actually a foot by a foot, It's actually a wrist-worn device. It's entirely configurable by like a watch-like interface. It can adapt and it can learn after every seizure so that it will more effectively detect the next seizure. And most innovative of all, it tells the time. Thank you.